Hello, I'm Jake Wallis-Simons. Welcome back to Let's Talk America, a podcast from the Jewish Chronicle in which I'm joined by Josh Kraushaar, the editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider in Washington, D.C., to explore the race for the White House through a Jewish lens. This has been quite the week in American politics. It began with Joe Biden in the driving seat and ended with his defenestration and replacement by Kamala Harris, the 59-year-old vice president with the weird laugh. So, Josh, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Jake.
So, Josh, there's been lots of rumours about how Joe Biden was persuaded to step down involving Barack Obama, who famously persuaded him to step aside for Hillary Clinton in 2016 so that she could have a chance of beating Trump. We all know how that worked out. What do you think actually happened behind the scenes?
Well, I don't think it's much of a secret. Almost every significant Democratic Party leader, whether publicly or privately, called on Joe Biden to step aside or privately gave a vote of no confidence in his ability to run a good race. And look, if you're going to go after the captain, you best not miss. That was, I mean, we got to the point where Democrats had wounded their nominee to such the point that if he was the nominee, he would lose. Like they basically guaranteed that he could not defeat Donald Trump. And once we got to that point, and the polls suggested Donald Trump was not winning ground, he was not gaining ground. It was mostly Joe Biden losing ground, mostly from Democrats. So I think Biden, it took a while, but he saw the reality. He stepped aside, put out a tweet on last Sunday, and then gave a speech on Wednesday. But look, I think if you're a Democrat right now in Washington, you can't be more pleased about the handoff to which Biden endorsed the vice president, Kamala Harris, in his statement. She has quickly secured the support of those same Democratic leaders, though I will note that there are some notable names running for re-election that have not yet warmed to Vice President Harris. But a lot of the leaders in the party quickly endorsed her and got behind her. And that's all the Democrats could have asked for after a 3-week period of disunity and civil war about who the nominee was going to be.
Right. Well, I guess there were some suggestions that Obama was involved with sort of putting Joe Biden up for that ill-fated debate with Donald Trump early in order to expose his apparent mental decline and force him out. And then that Obama wanted the former astronaut and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly to take over, but then Biden kind of bamboozled that plan by endorsing Harris, and of course the Obamas took some days before they came out in support of her.
Look, Obama was one of the earliest champions of Kamala Harris's political career. The notion that Obama has worries about it, that was never the case. I think he was actually more worried about the perception that he was pulling strings behind the scenes, which I think he was. I mean, clearly, the Obamas are sort of masters at sort of the passive-aggressive political game, and put out a nice note praising Joe Biden after his poor debate performance, but working with other Democratic leaders to be more public against, about their frustrations and concerns about his ability to run a good campaign. But Obama was a champion of Kamala Harris from her early days in California politics. She was I think she was attended his own presidential kickoff many years ago in Illinois, and it makes all the sense in the world why he would not want to publicly get ahead of things in terms of endorsing Harris. He let the process play itself out, and then just Friday put out a very warm video with Michelle Obama also front and center, endorsing Harris and uniting the party behind her.
Right, now we'll talk about the other big American news in a few minutes, which of course is Prime Minister Netanyahu addressing Congress on Wednesday. But before we do, can you tell me a little bit about what we know of Kamala Harris's stance on Israel, what we know about it, how it compares to Joe Biden's, and what we can expect from that?
Well, look, Kamala Harris, on paper has not been, when she was in the Senate, she was not an anti-Israel lawmaker, but there's been a lot of concern, especially in the pro-Israel community, because she ran a campaign in 2020 that veered far to the left of a lot of other, or veered far to the left at a time when the Democratic Party felt that the party was moving far to the left on a whole host of issues, whether it was criminal justice issues, immigration issues, a lot of cultural issues. That turned out to be a massive miscalculation. and it's why she didn't even make it to the first contests in that presidential campaign. And there's been a lot of worry, even though she's not, explicitly like sided with the squad or even sided with the Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders faction of the Senate. She's spoken at AIPAC in the past as a senator. But there's a lot of people in her circle, namely her chief foreign policy advisor as vice president, who's a little more to the left, a little more skeptical, less supportive of Israel than the Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan duo with the Biden administration. And look, you just can't help but look at the direction of the Democratic Party and the direction of certain constituencies within the Democratic Party and not worry about how Harris is going to move the party and lead if she is elected president. We saw, and we'll talk about the Bibi speech in a little bit, but Netanyahu, right after leaving or right on his trip out of Washington, very concerned about the meeting that he had with Kamala Harris and compared it negatively to his meeting with President Biden in conversation with our team, with our reporter Lahav Harkov. His team was very, very concerned, and we reported about those particular anxieties in Jewish Insider. But that is a reflection, I think, of just where the Democratic Party is moving and how Harris is representative more of the left side of the party.
Can you tell me a bit more about what Bibi said to Lahav in his interview with her?
Well, they had a meeting, and then Harris went in front of the press and gave a 5-6 minute statement. By my ears, I didn't think there was anything too surprising from what she said. She expressed a desire to, as Biden has, to reach some kind of ceasefire that would allow all the hostages to be released. She mentioned the names of all the American hostages being held by Hamas. She talked about her support for Israel, or strong support for Israel at the top of her comments. But she also, in tone, was tough on Israel when it came to the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and where the Netanyahu team, I think, was concerned. It was over the fact that they think that putting pressure on Hamas is of the utmost importance at this time, as Israel is negotiating with Hamas and other interlocutors, and the fact that she kind of left some daylight and didn't show that unequivocal support in everything she said, and they contrasted it with Biden's comments, they left that meeting feeling a little bit unnerved.
Right. I mean, it struck me that when I watched Kamala's statement, it struck me that the one element that she missed out of her vision for ending the war and bringing peace was the defeat of Hamas. She talked about the need for Palestinians to have more security and peace and two-state solution, but if you leave Hamas in place, you can't gain those things.
So, yes, she did not give an unequivocal condemnation about Hamas and put the full pressure on Hamas like you might have expected. That said, Jake, that's been the critique of Biden. That's been the critique of the Biden administration for all this time. So, look, I think it's almost as interesting to hear Netanyahu's reaction as he spends Friday visiting Mar-a-Lago and Donald Trump and is sort of playing both sides of the U.S. political aisle. I think it's more as interesting in the Netanyahu reaction right after that meeting and willingness to express the fact that they were willing to talk to reporters and express their anxieties, concerns about Kamala Harris, more than the actual substance of what Harris said herself. I do think, though, that he's right, that there is a tonal shift, and she's always been seen, Jake, as the bad cop within this administration, that she may embrace the same policy that the Biden team does, but she often expresses it in more of a critical tone towards Israel.
Can you imagine Kamala Harris ever saying, like Biden has done frequently, you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist, I'm a Zionist? Can you imagine her saying that?
Well, so there was a report, CNN reported earlier this week that they were trying to ask Kamala Harris in her office whether she identifies as a Zionist, and she would not comment. She would not respond. Biden obviously said publicly.
That says quite a lot, doesn't it? And I wonder whether, given the increasing momentum from the left of the Democratic Party, from the Squad and their fellow travelers, do you think that a President Kamala Harris would be an easier figure to influence by the left against Israel?
Well, I always say follow their actions more than the spin or more than their, and I think that's where the Netanyahu team was a little bit concerned. To me, the bigger takeaway from this last week was Harris's slow response to these pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic, anti-American flag burners right outside the train station in Washington, D.C. during Netanyahu's speech. We were the first to report that Biden's spokesman for the Biden White House quickly condemned these protests as despicable and anti-American and, everything in the book. And a lot of other Democrats quickly, after seeing what was going on, did the same. In fact, it really made Netanyahu's speech, where he called these protesters part of the sort of the useful idiot crowd for Iran, it made it very prescient, because Democrats, essentially, many of them were agreeing with that point, and had to acknowledge that burning American flags, writing "Hamas is coming" on statues, vandalizing them, it was just despicable stuff. Harris took a day to put out a statement responding to that. We had reached out to her campaign. We heard nothing back for quite some time. She did put out a statement about it in the mid-morning, the day after of Netanyahu's speech. It was a strong statement. It was a strong statement condemning the pro-Hamas demonstrations, condemning the vandalism. But it took a long time for her campaign to put something that, frankly, should have been a gimme. It frankly should have been pretty easy to put together.
Yeah, a strong statement that was slow in coming. I mean, those protests, we have seen the pictures of what was going on, the people being pepper sprayed, the crowd, and of course that graffiti that you mentioned outside the station in Washington, D.C. How bad were the protests in terms of scale? Because I think there was some conflicting fears. Some people thought that they would be bigger, some people thought they'd be smaller. In reality, what actually happened? How big were they?
Well, I mean, in number, not. I don't think as large as maybe some of the more worrisome predictions. But look, it's less about the number and more about the damage that they. I mean, how many times have historic property been defaced and damaged right in the nation's capital? It's just it's a real concern, and there's also a worry that the government isn't prosecuting these criminals, and some of them again are waving the flags of terrorist organizations, defacing government property, stealing a flag, putting up a Palestinian flag on the top of a flagpole at Union Station. I mean, there's sort of a revolving door in the justice system, and there are a lot. I think you'll hear this on the campaign trail from Donald Trump that he likes to talk about this two-tier justice system, that people who were at the Capitol committed crimes on January 6th are being rightly so thrown the book at them, the legal system. But it looks like these people who have been attacking cops, writing terrorist slogans on government property, they're basically being booked and then released, and they don't suffer any consequences. So that is something I think that beyond the debates over Israel policy, that kind of just anti-American, anti-Semitic display across our country. We've seen this in the campus protests before. That really registers beyond, I think, just the foreign policy to a larger American body politic.
Right, so let's talk about the speech then. It's my understanding that, or according to Israeli sources, that Yahya Sinwar from his tunnel underground has recently been observing the increasing anti-Israel protests around the world and assuming that reading more into them than they would they should allow, as in thinking, he's become emboldened by that. But it seems that the speech that Bibi gave to Congress was full of all the right kind of visuals to disavow him of that notion. Lines of congressmen standing up, applauding, standing ovations, a lot of love for Bibi and his message. Do you think that this political moment will send a strong message of American-Israeli unity to Hamas and to the Iranians and around the world?
Well, look, as a bit of public diplomacy, I mean, Netanyahu is a master orator. I mean, you can't help but be, even if you don't like Bibi Netanyahu, if you support Israel and you've been beleaguered and demoralized and you've been having to deal with these radical anti-Israel protests over the last year, and you hear that speech, which was a rebuttal. It was a powerful rebuttal to the radical kind of extremes in this country, kind of point by point, taking on the anti-Semitic protesters as being backed by Iran, in fact, forcing the White House to kind of acknowledge that, which our government has said that there was Iranian funding and Iranian involvement. It didn't get covered by the media until Bibi Netanyahu brought it up in his speech. Highlighting the diversity and bravery of the IDF. I mean, that was a moment where it was a rebuttal to this ridiculous notion that Israel's a white colonialist, outpost. It was a powerful display, sort of rebutting the calamitous predictions of what would happen in Rafah. Thought it was notable that Netanyahu said I was in Rafah, and rebutted the doom and gloom predictions that we've heard so often from so many U.S. officials. I mean, it was a very, very powerful piece of rhetoric, and certainly for an American and maybe diaspora audience, really, I think, bucked up sort of the pro-Israel community. Now, interestingly enough, like when I talked to our Israel team, Lahav Harkov covered the speech from Capitol Hill, I think the reaction was a little bit different, and we wrote a piece sort of noting that Bibi speaks American par excellence, but, I think he's had trouble kind of moving the needle in Israeli public opinion very much, and I'm not sure if that speech really helped his political prospects in Israel. Maybe because he's showing he still has a good relationship with the United States. Maybe that will move the needle. But he didn't talk about a hostage deal. He didn't talk about the plan, and a lot of Democrats criticized him for it, for not outlining the steps that he's willing to take to cut a deal and get the hostages home. And I think that even from folks across the Israeli ideological spectrum, I think they've heard the kind of the rhetoric from Bibi before. They know he is really masterful at talking to American audiences. He doesn't have the same relationship with the Israeli press, though, and I think that limited the effect of the speech back home in Israel.
Right. I mean, it struck me that Bibi is quite sort of remarkable for refusing to give interviews to Israeli TV a lot of the time, but preferring to speak to journalists outside of Israel, particularly in the States, and particularly since October the 7th. And I think this is one element of the frustration the Israelis feel with him. 60% of Israelis want him gone. There are more than 100 hostages still languishing in Gaza, and people feel in Israel that he isn't doing enough to get them back. The north is full of ghost towns with Hezbollah missiles raining down, and the kids aren't able to go back to school for the new school year, as Yoav Gallant had promised a few weeks ago. And meanwhile, you have Sarah Netanyahu posing for Instagram on the newly refurbished private plane that they took to the States. And so all of this, there's like a split screen. Israelis are frustrated, but when he gave the message to Americans, people seemed to really like it. And it was very much a speech that was crafted to the international audience.
Yeah, look, there can be a obvious disconnect in that he's kind of meeting with top American officials at a time when the Israeli home front is still very much struggling. And I don't think the sense of the Israeli public is that the war has been won, even though there have been some impressive military gains in the last couple of months. It kind of reminds me, it's not quite an exact parallel, but Joe Biden in his sort of farewell address talked about all of his foreign policy accomplishments, like expanding NATO, and talking about his Middle East diplomacy. And Americans don't care about they care about the economy. They care about domestic concerns. There's a disconnect between your ability to show up at an international forum and actually handle the politics back home. And it's different. It's not an exact parallel, but Netanyahu certainly has a lot of skeptics across the ideological spectrum in Israel who have seen this before. And they know he's a good speaker. They know he can charm and woo an American audience. But in dealing and actually making the decisions and dealing with the challenges back home, not as effective. Going back to the domestic reaction here in the U.S., Jake, look, there was a lot of applause. I think Lahav counted 50 standing ovations for Netanyahu, which again is great public diplomacy. But I don't think Netanyahu really moved the needle, persuaded anyone who, people have made up their minds about him and about Israel. And frankly, he's in the big picture a drag, I think, because Democrats have Bibi derangement syndrome. They are unable to kind of dispassionately analyze what Netanyahu has to say. They've decided he's horrible and awful and partisan, and even Democrats that I think are pretty moderate, like your Alyssa Slotkins, Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. These are like pro-Israel, generally lawmakers who are just very anti-Bibi, who were at the speech, They did not applaud mostly when they were in the chamber. Even and I was sort of stunned. Even some of the lines about anti-Semitism on campus, they did not stand up with the Republicans and a lot of other Democrats. And I think that has nothing to do with what he was saying. It has to do with Netanyahu himself and how he's become such a polarizing figure. So I do think it's worth noting that despite the effective public diplomacy writ large, he's not moving the needle on public opinion in America. He's just too polarizing of a figure these days to do so. And I think the worry about where the Democratic Party is headed has not changed. And it would probably take another Israeli leader to make positive strides on that Democratic Party front.
70 Democrats snubbed the speech compared to the 58 who snubbed it in 2015 when he last addressed Congress. Don't forget, he's now surpassed Winston Churchill's record for addressing Congress as a foreign leader. But Kamala Harris didn't go along.
Yeah, so a lot more Democrats skipped the speech, didn't attend than the last time Netanyahu spoke, and certainly since Isaac Herzog spoke more recently before Congress. Look, when you have Nancy Pelosi, who has generally been a pro-Israel supporter, not attend. When you have Jerry Nadler, who, yes, he's a very progressive lawmaker, but is Jewish and represents a largely Jewish district in Manhattan, when he reads a book, ignoring Bibi. Look, it shows this is where the Democratic Party has gone.
And Kamala Harris?
Like I said, I think there's something of a Bibi derangement syndrome.
And Kamala Harris?
You're right. Well, look, and Kamala Harris, I think it's a little understandable that she, as presidential nominee, didn't want to have to be judged by when she would clap and when she didn't. Yes, she, as president of the Senate, she's attended every foreign dignitary who speaks before Congress. So that was a glaring absence. I kind of understand it from a political standpoint when the party is so badly divided and she's just starting her presidential campaign. She would be judged by every time she applauds or doesn't applaud, and that would have been a tough moment politically for her. She should have been there, but politically, I can understand that. I think it less forgivable, or I shouldn't say less forgivable, but I think the bigger problem is more what she said and the tone she expressed during the meeting with Netanyahu the next day.
After Netanyahu made the speech, he had a meeting with Donald Trump, and after that, Trump made a statement in which he said that the war should end because Israel isn't very good at public relations and it was damaging Israel's reputation overseas. What do you make of that statement that he made?
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting debate going on. We talked about this on the last episode, where there are Republicans are overwhelmingly pro-Israel, but when you look at sort of the America First ideology that Trump has embraced and J.D. Vance has endorsed and has gotten behind, there's reasons for Israel to worry, I think, on the right as well. And by the way, J.D. Vance was not at the speech either. He was also on the campaign trail, decided not to attend. So, look, he put out a statement expressing strong support for Israel. I don't think you're going to see any of the rhetoric change. But look, Trump gave an interview. It's kind of he's not really dived into the policy. He said if he was president, October 7th would never have happened. If he was president, Israel should get it done fast and win the war. But we don't know. Like, would he support if Israel needed to go into Lebanon and take out Hezbollah? Would he support that, or would he be wary of the possibility of needing to commit American military resources as part of that endeavor? I mean, we don't know how there's a lot of blanks and a lot of questions about Trump's foreign policy in a second term. And he certainly said the right things generally. And he's had some disagreements with Bibi post 2020. More about Bibi's endorsement or acknowledgement, I should say, of Joe Biden's election in 2020. But look, there are a lot of questions on the right as well.
Right. I mean, did you or your reporters pick up anything about the chemistry between Trump and Netanyahu? They used to get on very well. Then they had a falling out when Bibi congratulated Biden after he won. Hadn't spoken for years. Where are they at now, do you think?
Well, we'll see more today with the meeting. That the body language is going to be, I think, scrutinized as much as whatever said after the meeting. But look, that's the big question. Politics, the Republican Party, a lot of it is less about personalities. A lot of it is more about the politics of the respective parties. And you have a Democratic Party where the progressive base has turned, and it's almost become a prerequisite to be anti-Israel. So you have a large faction now of that party that has a hard time being at least outspokenly supportive of Israel. Whereas the evangelical base within the Republican Party is extremely cares about Israel and is extremely positive towards the Jewish state. So that's the and then that's the dynamic. If a Republican sounded more like Bernie Sanders on Israel, they'd be paying a big political price. And I think that's the reality. It's less about is Kamala Harris this and that. She's just looking at the voters and where the progressive base is, and that's the sad. Israel used to be a bipartisan issue because you had strong support within both parties, and that's not the case anymore within the Democratic Party, but it has solidified, if anything, within the Republican Party's electorate.
And yet we're not really seeing Jewish voters drifting over to the Republicans in any significant numbers, are we? How do you explain that?
Yeah, well, look, Trump is, I think if Nikki Haley was the Republican nominee, you might see historic Republican support among Jewish voters. There's a lot of volatility within the Jewish community. We talked about this last episode, Jake, but the movement is within the Democratic Party. There's a faction of the Democratic Party that has turned against Israel, the left progressive faction. But there also is a moderate faction, and I guess to the Democratic Party's credit, they've become the Republican Party has been a cult of personality under Donald Trump. It's hard to dissent from that mindset. The Democratic Party is a party of coalitions. It's a party and in fact, the party did show some mojo in being able to push Biden aside and get behind Kamala Harris. I don't know if the Republican Party would have been able to. I mean, if Republicans couldn't push Donald Trump aside in 2016 and beyond in impeachment and you name it. So, the one thing about the Democratic Party is there's a healthy debate going on within. The problem is that there's now a very radical faction within that umbrella. So those fights are taking on, as we're speaking, the fights over who Kamala Harris is going to pick as her running mate. That's taking place within the party, right? The fights over the platform at the convention over Israel, that's taking place within the party. I think a lot of Jewish voters, most of whom are Democrats, align more with the moderate wing of that party, and they still have a lot of influence. If for some reason the Democratic Party became the Corbyn Party, like we saw with what happened in across the pond in England, not that long ago, then I think you might see more significant changes. I think Trump also, as we've discussed, makes it hard for even Jewish center right voters to vote for Donald Trump and his behavior.
Right. I mean, speaking of the vice presidential ticket, Kamala Harris's running mate, Josh Shapiro, seems to have come back into the picture a little bit. I've seen more speculation that he might be picked. What are you picking up?
I'm hearing more Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona. If I had to bet, I would probably bet that she's going to play it safe and not want to alienate and tick off the left. If she did pick Governor Shapiro, it would be a sign that she's willing to do what it takes to win the election and to, if necessary, abandon the far left in that pursuit. It would be a very, very powerful message, and it would show that, again, that the moderate wing of the party is alive and well. Look, Josh Shapiro, from a purely political point of view, there's no running mate that has offers Harris more political upside than Shapiro. He is someone who is from obviously one of the most important states on the map, battleground state of Pennsylvania. He won re-election in a landslide, and he has 60% plus job approval ratings, winning support from independents and even a handful of Republicans. He is moderate. He, on Israel, we know he's very outspokenly supportive of Israel. Critical of Bibi Netanyahu, like most Democrats, but also has been critical of these anti-Semitic protests that have taken place, including in his home state of Pennsylvania, comparing some of these really virulently anti-Semitic protests on campus to the Ku Klux Klan. And that's a quote that a lot of the hard left has been angry about and would agitate against. But look, he offers Harris the ability to prove that she's not just a progressive, that she's actually willing to build bridges with the center of the party. I think Mark Kelly is the husband of Gabby Giffords. He is from Arizona, which is also another important swing state. That's the safer pick. He's also fairly moderate. Though on Israel, we did a story at Jewish Insider noting that even though he generally has a pretty pro-Israel record, he has sort of moved a little bit to the left as the party's moved left on Israel. So it's not like he's maybe not the most pro-Israel choice that you could pick among the short list. but look, he satisfies most of the left and the center. Like if you're going to pick a moderate Democrat, a moderate white Democrat, Kelly is someone who big voice on gun control because of his work in the aftermath of Gabby Giffords' the attempted assassination, and on immigration. Like he speaks to that issue more effectively than some Democrats, being in a border state. So I think if you're trying to be safe, if you're up by 2 points, if you're confident about your chances, I think Kelly makes more sense. It's certainly the safer pick. Shapiro, if you're down by 2 points, when the polls show Harris is trailing Donald Trump by a point or two on average, Shapiro is almost an obvious, too obvious of a pick. But I get the sense that Harris is a more cautious politician, and she's always tended to side or at least pander to the left throughout her political career, and I don't think this will be an exception.
Of course, Mark Kelly is a former astronaut, so that's got to count for something.
Yeah, I mean, great biography. That's what propelled him into the Senate. I guess we could make some space jokes or space metaphors here. But look, I think the biggest asset for Kelly is the fact that he has the Gabby, the shooting of Gabby Giffords. It's hard to believe, over a decade ago. I mean, that was a seminal moment in American politics, and it would really, I think, energize the Democratic Party base to have her kind of be involved in this presidential campaign. And he's from Arizona. Arizona is a state that's very winnable for Democrats, and there's a big Senate race in that state as well. So there is a lot of just check the boxes that
Right.
Kelly provides for the Democratic ticket.
Right, he could offer the rocket fuel, as it were, for the Harris campaign. Josh Kraushaar, thank you so much for joining us once again. Looking forward to speaking to you next time in our next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.